Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our conversation with Maud Dom. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
I'm welcome, Maud. I'm Amy Goodman. I'm a 3GNJ board member, and I'm the grandchild of four Holocaust survivors. I'm thrilled to be here tonight for our meaningful conversation with Maud Dom. We welcome all of you who are tuning in for the first time, as well as those who regularly participate in our programs. We are incredibly grateful for our community. We'd like to encourage all of you to submit questions in the Q&A, and Maud will address them after her presentation. For those of you who don't know, 3GNJ is an educational nonprofit for grandchildren of survivors and supporters. As a living link to our grandparents, we preserve the legacies and lessons of the Holocaust. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance and to provide a supportive forum for the descendants of survivors. 3GNJ currently has 55 active speakers that share their grandparents' stories of survival in classrooms all across the state. This school year alone, we've already topped 200 classroom presentations and impacted over 10,000 students, and the school year is not over yet. And to everyone, just by being here tonight, you're helping us honor the memories of our grandparents and ensuring that never again is more than just an empty phrase. Tonight, as mentioned, we are joined by Maud Dom. Maud is a Holocaust survivor who was born and spent her childhood in Holland. When Jews from her town started getting deported to concentration camps in 1942, Maud's parents arranged for Maud and her younger sister to be sheltered by a Christian family. Over the remainder of World War II, the sisters were hidden by several families. Maud has dedicated much of her adult life to Holocaust education for both teachers and students in New Jersey. She served for 24 years as a member of the State Board of Education, including 5 years as president. In 1995, she was president of the National Association of School Boards. She also served for 7 years on her local North Hunterdon school board, was chair of the Interstate Migrant Education Council, and was a longtime member of the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust Education, and now she serves as the chair of the commission. But that's not all. Maud is honored in the New Jersey Hall of Fame as an unsung hero for her activities in Holocaust education. And on April 19th of last year, Maud was knighted in the Netherlands by the king. Maud leads annual tours of Holocaust sites in Europe for educators and continues to speak in classrooms. Without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Maud Dom.
Thank you so much. Oh, that sounds wonderful, all those things. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight to share with you my story as a hidden child during the Second World War. I was, I am going to read something first because you will understand. It's called Facing Memory, Silent No More. Years of life beyond almost certain death. Who would have thought that we would live to see this day, given such overwhelming odds? For most of those years, the child survivors have lived in silence. Silence served as well, while hiding. Survival so often depended on being noticed, being inconspicuous, or on the ability to suppress tears and ignore pain. Grief was born in silence, so was rage. Silence is the language of the child survivor. We might have talked after the war, but adults persuaded us, get on with life, forget the past. Adults who themselves had survived suffered so much, inadvertently diminished the experiences of the children. In the aftermath, in that silence, which involved our existence, what needed saying was not said. And for I came to the United States in 1950. I didn't start to speak about what happened to my family until 1981. My parents never spoke about it, and I didn't either until I was watching CBS 60 Minutes was having a program, and they were doing a story on Wal Wallenberg, who saved many Hungarian Jews. And I thought, well, I'd like to see that program. So I watched it and it was very well done. And the following, usually was 60 minutes. The following week, they show you parts of what people have written in from the previous week's program. So I was rather curious to see what comments I would see on this story. And this appeared the following week, which was March 29th, 1981. And I'll quote what appeared on the screen. It said, "The Jews of Europe were not exterminated in gas chambers. The gas chambers were wartime propaganda fantasies." And I went, what? How can someone say this? And the person who signed it was even someone I know. I was so shocked. And I decided I was going to now tell and share my story. And this person who had written this was actually working for one of the candidates from my political party for mayor. And I decided I could not support this person if these are the kind of people that were working for him. So I went public on the local newspaper, and it said, "Politics makes strange bedfellows." And that was my first, when I started to speak about what happened to us. So to me, it's so important to do this. Now, we lived in a town called Amersfoort. I lived there with my mother, my father, and I have a sister 2 years younger. And my mother had originally come from Germany. She had come to the Netherlands to visit some friends, and somehow she ended up at a party and met this nice young man. And I guess romance was in the air. They fell in love. And eventually she moved to the Netherlands and they got married and she became a Dutch citizen. While her parents, with my German grandparents, were still living in Frankfurt am Main, where my grandfather was a cantor at the synagogue there and also taught at the yeshiva. But we lived a wonderful life. My father learned to be a chef. He worked for his father. My Dutch grandfather had a restaurant at the train station. And my father worked the restaurant. And my Dutch grandfather, also had many kiosks in many of the, including our town, but many other railroad stations also. But a kiosk in the Netherlands is more like a newspaper stand. It's not like the kiosks you have here. And we lived a very idyllic life. But as you know, someone by the name of Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany. And things started to happen in Germany. And many of the Jewish population started to leave and just didn't know what was happening and was afraid and left the country. Many, many came to the Netherlands because the Netherlands had been neutral in the First World War, and we were going to be neutral if there was going to be another war. So many people felt they would be safe in the Netherlands. My parents were also starting to be very concerned about my German grandparents. So my father one day took the train, went to Frankfurt am Main, and told my grandparents they would have to come and live with us because it wasn't safe. Evidently, my grandfather had already been picked up twice. And I think one of the stops was Buchenwald. I don't know where else he was, but each time he was able to leave. So they also realized it was high time they left and come and be safe and live in the Netherlands. But so many came, and many had friends and relatives in the Netherlands. So that wasn't a problem for where they could go. But so many came, and they didn't know anyone. So the Dutch government took a piece of land and built housing for all these people. And it was called Westerbork, but it became a whole community because there were children in this group. There were teachers, so the teachers created a little school so the children could continue their education. There were physicians, they created a little hospital, and the place was called Westerbork. But more and more things started to happen. And it was on May 10th in 1940, in the middle of the night, people heard airplanes overhead, and everybody woke up from it and looked outside and saw German planes coming in with soldiers parachuting down. Hitler invaded the Netherlands. The next morning, troops, tanks, everything started moving in. And for 4 days, the Dutch armed forces was trying to fight this mighty German army. Hitler just expected he would just be able to run over this country and didn't expect the resistance he received. So on the fifth day, Hitler came in and bombed our biggest port city of Rotterdam. Hundreds of people died. People were homeless. It was horrible. And Hitler said to the Dutch, if you don't surrender now, I'm going to bomb every city in the Netherlands. So what were the Dutch to do? We surrendered. And that's when it started for the Jewish population in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a monarchy. And Queen, at that time, it was Queen Wilhelmina. She left the country and with her cabinet and set up a government exile in England. And Hitler chose someone, an Austrian Nazi by the name of Dr. Arthur Seyss-Inquart. He now became the commandant of the Netherlands. At first, it was quiet, but it didn't take very long. And the very first thing that came out from him was that if you were Jewish, you had to register. Most everybody did, even my parents also, of where you lived, where you worked, who lived with you, and all sorts of other information about the families. And as I said, my parents filled it out too. And then it didn't take very long. A regulation came out that if you were Jewish and worked for the government, you were fired. And that's how it started, because now they had all this information and were acting upon it. And it became very, very difficult for all of us at that time. And all of a sudden, more regulations started to come out against the Jewish population. Signs started to appear in the park, forbidden for Jews. Restaurants, Jews not desired. Movie theater, wherever we always frequented, we were suddenly not allowed to go. So and my mother could only go, of course, we didn't have supermarkets, but my mother could only go to certain stores on certain times and certain days. Jewish housewives were restricted of where they could go and shop even. So it became so difficult. Well, I was very, very excited because in the summer of 1941, I started school. I was going to a public school in our neighborhood, and I was in kindergarten, and my teacher was Mrs. Eva Schnell. She too was Jewish and had escaped from Germany with her husband, and she was now my teacher. And I loved going to school. Another regulation came out, and it said no Jewish child may go to a public school. All Jewish children have to go to school for just Jewish children. Well, I'm 5.5 years old. I didn't understand that I suddenly couldn't go to school. And then they went even further. Now they said anyone who works in a public school setting who's Jewish, whether it was the superintendent or the teachers, whoever worked in the public school system, if you were Jewish, you were also fired. So some of the Jewish teachers and some of the Jewish mothers got together and started renting rooms in different buildings to try and continue our education as best as they could. But it was hard. I didn't understand. My father and my grandfather had to take a Nazi into the business to make sure they could be watched. There was a curfew. All sorts of things were happening. Excuse me, I just, my throat. But it just continued and continued. So, but I had no idea of what was happening. And I know then another regulation came out in the beginning of 1942, and it said anyone who's 6 years old and older would have to wear the yellow star. I was so excited because in January I had just turned 6 and I didn't understand. I felt I'm just like the grown-ups. I can wear a star. And my sister was only 4 years old. And my mother was so happy that she didn't have to wear the star. But of course, she drove my mother crazy, and my mother had to sew on her jacket too to make her happy. But it was so difficult. And I remember my Dutch grandmother had been ill and was in a hospital all the way on the other side of town. And I remember walking with my mother. Years later, I finally understood what happened. We had, we also at the same time were not allowed to be a public transportation, no bus, no trains, no public transportation. Actually, the saving grace in the Netherlands was that everybody has a bicycle. But I remember walking with my mother because now we had to walk to this hospital. And when we got to a park, she said, "Oh, it's a little warm out. Why don't we just take off our jackets?" Because there was a big sign I couldn't read, but it said forbidden for Jews. So we were able to walk through the park without our jackets and without our stars. But it was very, very difficult. And then we had one synagogue in our town, and the rabbi called the whole congregation together because now war had started. This is in the spring of 1942. War had started. There were bombings. I remember being so scared when the sirens went off and we had to go in the basements or find shelter and wait until we got an all clear sign because the Germans who were in our country were shooting at these planes and they had their little planes up there too. So there was so much going on and we had to just sit and hide until we got the all clear sign. But it was also, so the rabbi called the whole congregation together. My parents went also. And the rabbi read a letter. And the letter was from the German command. And it was addressed to the Jews of Amersfoort. It said, "We have wonderful news for you. We are going to take you away from the war scene. We're going to have trains at the train station, and we will let you know when we want you to board the trains. And here's a list of items you should bring with you: a pillow, a blanket, a plate, a cup, some eating utensils, some extra clothes." And the letter went on to say, then they said, "Also, don't worry about anything in your house while you're gone. You lock the door and we'll watch over all your belongings so that when you come back, everything will be there for you." And the very last sentence said, "The trains will be going east." And everybody's saying, "Well, no country, no city. What does that mean?" So my parents too were wondering what this was. And a very dear Christian friend of theirs, I think he was like the deputy mayor, lived near the synagogue. So my parents snuck into his house because we were not allowed to visit our Christian friends, nor were our Christian friends allowed to visit us. So they had to sneak in his house because my mother said, well, they thought maybe he knows more about this. So they got into the house, and my mother happened to look on his desk, and she saw that same letter that had just been read in the synagogue. She thought he could only be one of two things. He's either collaborating with the Nazis, and there were many Dutch who were, or he's working for the resistance, the underground, and many Dutch were involved with that also. So she got up enough nerve. His name was Kees, and she said, "Kees, how come you have this letter?" And he said, "Well, I'll tell you." He said, We have been going, I'm with the resistance, the underground. We have been going all over the Netherlands asking Christian families, should there be a need, would you be willing to hide Jewish children? And he said, I have an address for your daughters. I can't tell you who they are. I cannot tell you where they live. The only thing he said was they lived on a farm. So when I heard that, I realized what a difficult decision for a parent to make, especially in this time of war, and to send your children to a total stranger. You may never see your children again. You don't know where they are. So it's a very difficult decision for a parent to make. And he said to them, I have to know by tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, I do not have an address for you, only for the children. So my parents went home and they decided they would do this. And they informed him the next day that they said yes. I remember my mother early that day, that afternoon, sat me down and she said, Maud, I have some great news. I have something wonderful to tell you. You know what? You and your sister are going to a farm on a vacation. And while you're on your vacation, Dad and I are going on our vacation. And then we're going to swing by the farm and pick you up again. Well, I was so excited, and so was my sister living in the city to be able to go on a vacation to our farm. So my mother packed a little suitcase for each of us with some things, clothes that we would need for the next couple of weeks. And then it was like late afternoon. I remember my father took us outside, and my sister and I, he told us to take our bicycles, and he had the two suitcases. And I remember we walked down our street a couple of blocks to another house. And he said to me, he said, to go inside the house, he said, and we will see you in a couple of weeks and take very good care of your little sister. Because I don't remember what he said, where we were going or what was going to happen now. So, and there's no one alive anymore for me to ask. So I took my sister by the hand. My father took the bicycles and turned around and went home. And my sister and I went into this house, and it was Mr. Jan Canis's family. Wonderful, nice people, and they had children also. And we had dinner with them, and they put us to bed. And it must have been about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. They woke us up, and they said, hurry up, girls, get dressed. So we got dressed. And then I realized what was happening because we walked through the woods nearby in the middle of the night because we could not leave on a train from my home city because of the businesses there. Everybody knew my sister and I, and they didn't want us to be seen, I'm sure, with a strange man getting on a train. So the whole idea was that we would walk through the woods to the next town, and that's where we would take a train. And I remember walking through the woods because I was very excited. I'm a big girl now, I have my own flashlight, and I got kind of sidetracked and saw there were blueberries, wild blueberries. So I kept stopping and eating blueberries. And I know he was getting very upset with me because obviously we had to get to a train at a certain time. And I always remember picking the blueberries. But then sometimes you wonder, did you remember it correctly? And many years later, maybe 20 years ago, I met one of the daughters of Mr. Canis, who now lives in the United States. And we were just talking about everything. She said, oh, yes, I remember my father. He was so upset with you and angry at you because all the blueberries you were picking. So I knew that it was true. And by daylight, we did arrive in the next town, and we did get on a train. I don't remember how we got from the train station to the farmhouse. Now, this was in an area in the Netherlands. There were very religious Christians, and it was many, many farms and along a major highway. And a major highway at that time was one lane this way, one lane that way. And the farms were all facing the highway with all the fields in the back. And I remember getting to the farm. We were there, but there were German soldiers running around all over the place. They had huge guns set up because they were shooting at the airplanes coming overhead. On the highway, it was nothing but military trucks, tanks. And next thing I know, we didn't go in the house. We went out to the back of the house to a wheat field. And the people there wear traditional Dutch costumes. Ladies have the little hats and the beads and wooden shoes. And here were two little girls in their city dresses, and they also speak a dialect there. So we're out near the wheat field, and then I think they probably told me we were going to play hide and go seek or something, because I was told we had to go hide in the wheat field. And they said, don't just walk in like this, because you leave a trail. And German soldiers walking by say, oh, and we'll try to follow it. You have to zigzag into the field so you don't break down too many of the wheat. Oh, and here's an umbrella, because they said it might rain. So I took my sister and the umbrella, and we wandered into this wheat field. I have no idea how long we were in the wheat field, but my sister started to cry. She wanted her mommy. And then it started to rain. And I'm such a bright child. Of course, I opened the umbrella, but it had to be over the wheat. So now you could see an umbrella for about 20 miles and hear a child crying in the middle of a wheat field. So I guess they heard all that and they came out and took us out of the wheat field and brought us into the farmhouse. And I remember that evening, a couple of people came over, probably their relatives. Now, this couple had never had children, and they were in their 60s. And these farms, the whole area was very primitive. There was no faucets with water. There was a water pump. There was an outhouse, and it had 2 rooms and a kitchen. And so that evening, some relatives came over, and they were just talking to me. I said, oh, yes, I'm a big girl because I wear a star. Oh, I'm not wearing my star. Oh, and I go to school. And I don't know what else was said. And then after a while, the couple of people left and we had dinner. And then after dinner, this couple sat me down and they said, we're going to tell you something that you must remember, no matter who asks you, who are you? You are supposed to be our nieces who have been bombed out of a city. And there were so many people who were homeless and everybody was taking people in. And since you're our nieces, you have to call us aunt and uncle. And uncle is oom and aunt is tante. But my sister couldn't say tante, called her Tunny. So all our lives, she's always been Tunny. And they said, you cannot go to school here. I didn't understand why not. But as I got older, I realized that they were afraid that I was going to go to school and talk to a classmate and say something that maybe where I came from or something. And that child may go home and tell a parent, oh, I have a new girl in my class. And she said, and the parents may be collaborating with the Nazis because you couldn't trust anyone. So they said, no, you can't go to school. And since you're our nieces, you have to also have our last name. And their last name was Sprunk. And to me, my first name in Dutch, it's pronounced Mout, but it's an unusual name. So they said, your new name is going to be Margie Sprunk, and your sister Rita will be Rika Sprunk. And you have to stay in the house until you remember your new name. But it's also kind of hard when I realize that now when you're 6.5 years old and suddenly all this you have to remember. And they said, you have to stay in the house because they had to go out every day and work the fields. So, and they said, don't go near windows. And don't answer a knock on the door because it may be a German soldier. And I don't know how long it took, but eventually I knew my new name. And then we were allowed to go out with them every day to work the fields. And on Sunday, and there were no little children around living around there at all. And after church, then we could go to church with them. And I remember one Sunday after church, because everybody kind of relaxed all day Sunday and went to visit relatives and friends. And one day we went to visit aunt's widowed sister who lived on another farm. And I remember we went there and I was so surprised because who was hiding there? But Mrs. Eva Schnell, my kindergarten teacher from my hometown, and her husband. And it was so wonderful because I felt somebody I knew. And so every Sunday after church, we would go there, and she was beginning to teach us how to read and write. I don't know exactly when it was, but one day, German soldiers arrived on the farm. They all jumped out of the truck and searched the house. They couldn't find anyone. Evidently, someone had revealed that my teacher and her husband were hiding on this farm. They searched the house, found no one. Then they went outside and went exactly to that haystack where they were hiding underneath. So they even knew where they were hiding. And they took them out and they said to Aunt's sister, "We're taking your son." He was about 18, 19 at the time. And she said, "No, you have to take me because this is my farm and I'm hiding them." Because everyone who was hiding Jews, if Jews were found, who were hiding them would also be taken. And they said, "No, we're taking your son." So they took him to a place not too far away where they were going to be processed because the Nazis had kept very accurate records of everyone, who they were, where they were born, etc. So my teacher and her husband were in this facility. And in the middle of the night, some Dutch Nazis entered it because they wanted to take my teacher. They took my teacher, her husband, and also four other men who were at that facility at that time. There may have been others also, but they took the six of them and secretly marched them out into a park not too far away and gave them shovels and had them dig their own graves. And they were all shot to death. It was covered over. And after the war, I heard many stories of what happened in the end. One was that the bodies were put on a train, but that wasn't true. It seems that it was left alone. And after the war, the villagers came together and reburied them in a cemetery in one of the communities. And I visited. They have a beautiful grave for my teacher and her husband there. So these were the kind of things that were happening, and you couldn't trust anyone. Now, Aunt's sister's son was able to, he worked, I think, in a milk factory or something. Somehow he was able to be released. He talked himself out of it, he got released. But these were the things that were happening all around us. And then I also remember one day they said we went to visit somebody in the afternoon and we came back. And then Uncle said to me, "I want to show you something outside." It was around dusk. So we walked outside. I was maybe 7.5 at that time. He walked me outside and he looked around. There were no German soldiers around. And we went into one of the barns. And that barn, when you walked in, the back of it was open. I could look right into the next farm. And he looked again, no soldiers. Then he bent down. And in this barn, we kept all the wood because there was no gas or electric. So all the wood was there. And also living with us was aunt's brother, who was a wooden shoemaker. So he had a lot of wood too. So Uncle bent down, cleared away part of the wood. And then I saw there was like a trap door. And he opened it up, and there was a hole in the ground, and there was a young Jewish boy hiding in there. He was about 17, 18, and he had like some straw mattresses and he had some candles. I'd never seen him before. So Uncle introduced me to him, and then we talked for a little bit, and then we left, walked back up, but they had made like a few steps down into this hole. And then Uncle put the trapdoor back down and covered it with the wood. And we went back in the house. And Uncle said, I want you to bring him something to eat once a day. But be very careful that nobody sees you. And everything worked fine. I don't know how long it was, but one day I had brought him something to eat. And, I was little, but I still was able to clear the wood, open the trapdoor, and I had a pot of food. And when he was done eating, I took the pot and I went up the few steps and I looked, and there were a half a dozen German soldiers just standing there looking at me. I got so scared because this was very obvious of what was going on here. And I didn't know what, I knew they were going to shoot me. But they just stood there. So I decided I was just going to pretend they weren't there. So I busied myself, put the trapdoor back down, covered it with the wood, and they just stood there and watched. And then I picked up the pot, and now I had to turn my back to them and walk out. And I prayed because I knew they're just going to shoot me. But nothing happened. They turned around and walked away. And of course, when I got into the farmhouse, I was hysterical. I was so upset. And they said, and Uncle said, well, we have to contact the underground to have him moved immediately because these soldiers didn't say anything, but they're going to tell a superior officer and they're going to come back and get all of us. And the young man was very quickly moved to another hiding place. Every night I went to bed and prayed that they wouldn't come because if they did, it was going to be my fault. But no one ever came. These soldiers never said anything to anyone. And I didn't understand. But, as I got older, I realized what this was. These were soldiers, not Nazis. These were soldiers that were drafted into the army and probably had families of their own and just never told anyone what they had seen. So even in all this madness, there was some goodness because they saved our lives. But it was just so difficult to be so little and not fully understanding and having this fear. And there was nothing, no toys, no birthday celebrations. But I went around and I had a couple of secret shelves in one of the barns. And I would look around. There was all sorts of spent ammunition everywhere. Planes had crashed, and I could find one of those and rummage through there what I could find that, I don't know. And I had it all in the secret shelf. I didn't even tell my sister about it because she would rat me out, I know. So only I knew about the shelves on this barn. And I'll have to tell you in the end what I had. But it was so hard and no parents. And we were, mostly left on our own a lot. But it was very, very hard. And then I remember one day we had gone to visit some friends and Uncle was taking off his jacket and we're home and he went like this. He fell down, he had a heart attack and died. He died on January 20th, 1944. And he was buried on January 24th, my 8th birthday. I will always remember that. And it was horrible because we had gotten to really love these people, taking care of us. And then the resistance came and said to Aunt, now you can't run the farm anymore by yourself. So we'll have to find another address for the girls. She said, no, I'm keeping them. And if their parents return, I'll return them to their parents. If their parents do not return, I will raise them as my own. So we stayed. And then a nephew and his wife and baby moved into the other room and they ran the farm. So we stayed with Aunt. We had the one room. And then it must have been right after Christmas in 1944. Two people came into the room and they said, you have to leave right now. So they put us on the back of their bicycles. Evidently, someone had revealed who we were and where we were hiding. But there were also people who would overhear this when people, were talking, or they could overhear the Germans talking about where they were going to go next or what was going to happen. And then they would tell the resistance. So, and then they at least could give a warning. Many times people had a warning that they were coming and they hid whoever they had in their homes hiding, hid them. And soldiers, I know of one incident where the soldiers came and searched the whole house and found no one. And they left. But then they come back a couple of hours later because it's just human nature. They wait a while after the German soldiers left, and then they said, hey, everybody can come out again. It's safe. They're gone. And they would come back and really catch people that way. So we were on the back of these bikes and we spent the night on another farm. And the next morning they brought us to another family. And this family lived in a fishing village, not too far away. And this fishing village they had many fishermen, the whole village. But many years earlier, there was a huge inlet from the North Sea. And the Dutch liked to reclaim land and had built a dike across this inlet from one province to the other, closed it off. It became a huge lake. And it was salt water. But through the years, the rivers emptying into it, the water started getting mixed with fresh water and salt water. And a lot of the fish died. But there was one fish that continued to multiply. And we had that fish for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was eel. Because the winter of 1944 to 45 was the hunger winter in the Netherlands. There was nothing to eat for us. And people started eating tulip bulbs. People said, no, don't eat them. They're toxic. You're going to die. But nobody died. So we were eating, also had all sorts of recipes were made with tulip bulbs, any kind of bulbs they could find. So it was very, very hard, especially in this village. On the farm, we had food. And I remember even on the farm one time, the whole village got together and secretly slaughtered a pig because the German soldiers used to come on the farms and say, oh, that pig is right. Or take things, we'd milk the cows, put the milk at the end of the street, empty cartons or empty containers would come back. So it was very hard. So when they slaughtered the pig, my sister and I were so excited because there was one part of that pig we wanted. It was a toy. And usually when I'm in schools, because I interact with the kids, I ask them, what part of the pig? Well, they come up with every part. And one day a little boy said, oh, I know, I know. I said, what? He said, the bladder. I said, how did you know that? He said, I heard you speak before. But the bladder, we could dry it out and like a balloon, we could blow it up and close it. And we had a ball to play with. But in this fishing village, unfortunately, there was nothing to eat. We were very lucky if we got a little piece of bread. But while we were there, we were allowed to now be outside with other children. because we were dressed like everybody else. We spoke the dialect. But again, I had a new name. Now my name was Marie Hogendoorn. And people always tried to find names that they could easily remember, whether it was friends or relatives. So part of their family name was Westerink, but Hogendoorn was also relatives of theirs. But we were not allowed to go outside and play with other children. And it was interesting because we were so hungry. We used to go hunt and find big bugs. And then we'd pull off the legs, put a little stick through them, and make a little fire and roast them and eat them because we were so hungry. And while we were there the last 4 months of the war. But I remember in the evenings, the men would all, some of them would gather and listen to the radio late at night. Because when we were invaded by the German soldiers, they took away all our radios for everyone. But now there's a way of making a radio. I don't know how, but they were able to listen to the radio to hear the latest news. And months earlier, they had told me there had been a landing in France. Of course, that was the landing in Normandy in 1944. But I had no idea where Normandy was. I never went to school. So now they were listening. And then one day they said, well, what happened? The soldiers from the landing had moved through France. Some went into Germany and others continued to go north. And they had freed Belgium, Luxembourg, and they came into the Netherlands and liberated the southern part of the Netherlands. But where all the rivers ran across to the North Sea, that's where the Germans put up a great deal of resistance. And we were north, so we were not free. And it was April the 19th, 1945, early in the morning, someone told me that they had already freed the village before us, and they were now coming to our village. And everybody right away heard this. Everybody got so excited. German soldiers left the village, and people put out their flags, and we were all in the streets, and everybody were already celebrating because we knew the soldiers were coming. But then the German soldiers came back, and they were angry that we were celebrating, and they were just randomly shooting at everybody. And then they left again. And people went out and retrieved their dead and wounded, and took down the flags, and everybody stayed in the house. And I remember we were in the house on the second floor. I could look out one of the windows because they told me also, they also knew exactly where they were coming in, not on the highway outside of the village. They were coming on a dike across from this lake, on this dike into the village. So everybody got so, and looking and looking and looking, and I was looking, and all of a sudden I saw a open truck with men in blue coveralls standing in this truck, came into the village and pulled to the side. And right behind that came these huge tanks with Canadian soldiers, rolled into this village on the cobblestone streets, and it was incredible. Everybody came outside, and it still was, it still hits me because it was so wonderful. Just like that, we were free. Some of the fighting was further in other villages, but we were now free. And the soldiers knew that we were starving. They were throwing out their rations, and people were climbing all over the tanks. And I was standing out there near one of the tanks with Yo. She was the daughter of the second family, and we were standing there with her, and she caught something. She wants to give it to me. I didn't know what it was. I said, no. So then she unwrapped it, and it was this long brown thing. I didn't know. She says, here, for you. I still didn't want it. And then she broke off a piece and shoved it in my mouth. And that was chocolate. And the book I wrote is called Chocolate, the Taste of Freedom. That was my first taste of freedom, was the chocolate. So everybody celebrated for a long time. And then the resistance again said they wanted us to go back, my sister and I, to the farm to wait to see if my parents survived. I don't know how long it took, but I remember one day we were in the pump room and I had a door to the outside, and Tani and my sister and I was standing with her, with Tani, hiding behind her because we didn't know this man and woman standing there. And I remember Tani gave me a little shove and she said, "That's your mommy and your daddy. Shake their hand." So she gave me a shove. I went up, shook their hands, and ran back. Didn't know them. And I can imagine for a parent not seeing your children for 3 years and knowing they survived and they don't recognize you. So they stayed on the farm for a little bit so we could get used to them. So I took my father into this barn where I had my secret toys. I was so proud of it, because when we came back from the fishing village after the 4 months, the first thing I did when I got back to the farm, I ran secretly into this barn, and my toys were still there. So now I wanted to show my father. Well, my father almost had a heart attack because it was all live ammunition. I had a couple of hand grenades, and I don't know what else. I never saw this stuff again. But I don't know how long my parents stayed with us on the farm. But then one day, my mother, she was so surprised. She told me years later. One day I said to them, "Okay, I'm 9 years old. Okay, we'll go home with you. But if we don't like you, we're coming back and living with Aunt." So my mother said, "Okay." And we went back with my parents. But it was my parents survived because that day that my father had brought us into hiding, that evening, Christian friends are there, snuck into the house. They wanted to see how they were doing. And they came in and they said, "Where are the girls?" And my father said, "Well, they went into hiding. I just brought them away today." And they said, "Well, where are you going to hide?" And they said, "We have no place to go." They said, "Stay with us." They had a separate building. They had a car dealership, and they were living above it in an apartment. They said, "The only thing is there's two German officers living in one of our bedrooms." And my parents thought about it, but they decided they would go. They packed a few things, locked the door to our house, and walked over there. And my parents lived in their attic for 3 years. My father could never go outside because he would be recognized. It was his hometown. And also, German soldiers were grabbing people right off the street, young men, and grabbed them off the street to send them to Germany to work in the factories. My mother would dress as a nurse because not many people knew her. She was a newbie. And she would dress as a nurse and try to get food for them because for the four of them. So it was very difficult, but they survived. And they were told their children were still alive also. And then it took them quite a while to come to where we were hitchhiking, and because there was nothing moving other than military vehicles and food trucks with food for everybody because everybody, the whole country was starving. So we were reunited and went back home. And then I remember our house was gone. We moved into my Dutch grandparents' home. I remember my mother receiving a note from the Red Cross to inform her that her parents had been murdered in Sobibor. My Dutch grandfather also, my father's sister, her husband, and my three little cousins all died in Sobibor. The only person who's buried in the Netherlands is my Dutch grandmother. When my grandfather got the notice that they had to go to the train station because it was their turn to get on these trains, he asked if he could use an ambulance because my Dutch grandmother was still in the hospital. They allowed him to have an ambulance, and the trains first went to Amsterdam from my hometown. The Jews from my hometown went to Amsterdam first, and she died there. And somehow I don't know all, but somebody did find her grave in a Jewish cemetery outside of Amsterdam. She is actually buried there. But it was just so hard for my parents to learn of this. But we were so fortunate that the four of us survived because people were so kind to help us and hide us and take care of us. And it was just the whole thing. I mean, it's so hard for me to even tell my story in such a short time because there was so much. But maybe you want to show the slides at this point. I have some slides I'm going to show you, and I'll explain some of them so you can see some of the things. Okay, the next. This was the star I had to wear, and our stars had Jood in black letters, which is pronounced Yot, which means Jew. Okay, next. This was the book I wrote, Chocolate, The Taste of Freedom. To the right, it is in Dutch. It's now been published in Dutch in an organization in the village where we were hidden, translated it, published it, and gave every student in both of these communities where we're hidden a copy of the book. And the one on the top is a documentary that PBS did. They came with us on one of my teacher trips and met us in the Netherlands and filmed. Okay, next. This is a picture of my family before, maybe a year or so before the war. My mother, my father, my sister, and I'm the one next to my dad with that neat hairdo. Okay, next. This is a composite picture of my family. Top left, my Dutch grandparents. Top right, my German grandparents, my father's sister, her husband, and my three little cousins who were all within the age of my sister and I. And the only one who did not die in the concentration camp was top left, my Dutch grandmother. And my mother was an only child. Okay, next. This was a train station, the way it looked at that time. And that building to the right, that little building, that was the kiosk that my grandfather had. The next. I took that picture, and it was my first time back in the Netherlands after I came to the United States. I had been in the United States about 5 years. The restaurant that belonged to my grandfather, where my father worked, was still there at that time, and I took a picture of it. And the next. This is a picture of my Dutch grandparents, myself, and my cousin seated at the restaurant, at our restaurant. And next. And do the next one too. This is a picture of a classroom with the Jewish teachers and Jewish mothers. And my sister and I are both there. And also the teacher all the way on the right, on the top, with her arm in front of this little boy. He and his brother also survived. They were friends of mine. But most of these children in this picture died and were taken to concentration camps. Okay, next. My mother had to buy these stars, and each one she had to pay 1 guilder, which at that time was a lot of money, like $1, but it was a lot of money at that time. Then she had to cut them out and sew them on our clothing. Next. This says in German Jewish quarter and in Dutch Jewish quarter, because as I said, I know of all the people from my hometown, the Jews from my hometown went to Amsterdam first. It wasn't a ghetto. It wasn't closed off. It was open. It was just a sign there that this was the area where they were. And the next. They took down many of the street signs in Amsterdam because it was somehow related to Jews in one way, maybe the name or the name of the street after someone else or somehow. So all those they took down and put up their own signs in German. And it's the same with many of the concentration camps in Poland. They were all with German names, not Polish names of the towns where they were, German names again. Okay, next. These are people that just got off this trolley car and they were walking into a theater that they were using as a holding place, sometimes for weeks for people. And you can see they have their baggage and they're walking into this building. You can do the next one. And the next picture, the first time I went into this theater, there was this wall, black wall, and in white were all these names and an eternal flame burning below it. These were names of people who they knew had been through this transported through this theater or had been there at one time. And I saw my family name, Peper, and Eschwege, my German grandparents. So I know they were all there at one time or another before they were taken to Westerbork. And if you remember in the beginning, I spoke about this place, Westerbork, where Jews from Germany had come and the Dutch had built this area for them. Because when we were invaded, they said, "Oh, we have so many Jews right here." They fenced it off and it became the largest transit camp in the Netherlands. There were more, but that one was the largest. And my family went from that theater by train to Westerbork. And from there, Westerbork, they went to Sobibor. And they had to pay for the train to Sobibor. Everyone was charged for a train ticket. Okay, next. That's a double. This was a company called Pulse, even though they had said, don't worry about anything in your home. So all the homes where people had either gone into hiding or had gone on the train, everything was in their house. They came in, the Germans hired this moving company, Pulse, took everything out of these houses and shipped it to Germany. And it became a verb. When they said your house was pulsed, you knew where your stuff was. Next. This was the farmhouse where we were hidden at first, the first almost 3 years. And to the right, the picture on the bottom, to the right is the side of the farmhouse. And the green building is where Aunt's brother made his wooden shoes. And behind that, you can see another roof. And that barn was where the young man was hidden, who, by the way, did survive the camp. He was never taken to a camp. He lived, it turned out, in the same fishing village where we were. Though I never saw him because he was totally hidden all the time, but he survived. None of his family survived. The next. This I found in a book, and I realized that that was a picture of my sister and I. And you can see the wooden shoes, and it must have been taken on a Sunday because everybody is dressed very nice for church. The next. Aunt was very brave to take us to a photographer to have our picture taken with her. And my sister and I, and then a picture of the two of us alone. And you can see how we're standing because the clothes we are wearing were dresses that we had come with 2 years before. And it really didn't fit us anymore. And the shoes didn't fit us. So we were just standing. We couldn't move because, after that, we were wearing everybody else's hand-me-downs. But she wanted this picture taken. Next. This is a picture of Uncle on the left and picture on the right. That is Aunt's brother. That was a hearing aid in the 1940s. I was talking in a school one day, and I think there were fifth and sixth graders, and a little boy jumped up and he said, see, this is my hearing aid. He was so proud of it because you could barely see it. Okay, the next. I had both families, the Westerink family and the Spronk family, honored as righteous at Yad Vashem. And their names at Yad Vashem, down a little lower because it's up on a hill, are big cement walls. And there's to all the righteous by countries, their names are all put on there. And I was so happy that I was able to do it. Unfortunately, when a lot of this started, they had already passed away, except this daughter of the second family. She was able to personally receive it. And from the Sprunk family, the nephews and nieces have both of them there. And they had a big thing with the Israeli embassy in The Hague when they were handed over these two things. And I was so happy that I was able to do that to honor them. The next. My mother gave me this letter after I was already in the United States. And I looked at it and It took me a while to search my memory, and I realized I remember one day on the farm, somebody gave me a piece of paper with letters. Of course, I couldn't read or write. So they gave me a pot of ink and a pen because it was done in pencil, and they had me trace all the letters. And then when the ink was dry, they must have erased the pencil, and somehow it got to my parents. And it said, "Dear Mommy and Daddy, we like it here very much where we want to be free. We'd very much like to see you again when we come back. I'm helping Aunt milk the cows. I want to become a farmer's girl. The teacher is giving us lessons, and I can already read a little bit. And Uncle has died. Goodbye, so long. Margje en Rika Sprong." My parents got it, and my parents then knew. So I knew that was probably in the spring of 1944 that they finally got this letter. So they knew at that time we were still alive. Next. This is the house in the fishing village. We were on the second floor. The next. From this next picture, from that window, I could see where the picture on the right, that is where those huge tanks came in to the village that day. Next. There were also, it was a large forest not too far away in another community, and the soldiers were always in there hunting for wild boar. But unbeknownst to them, the villagers had gotten together and built 9 of these huts at very different places through this forest and camouflaged it with greenery so it looked like it was part of the forest. And one day, and of course during the day, nobody was out of these huts. And one day, it seems, a little boy was just wandering around by himself. Soldiers saw him, they shot in the air. All the soldiers, because they thought, what is this little kid doing here? The soldiers all came who were in the forest at that time hunting, and they discovered 2 of these huts because they couldn't even find them. They found the 2. And these 4 people, that memorial there is for the 8 people who were murdered that day. But the villagers heard all the commotion and everything. They knew where all the huts were and saved all the other people from the other huts, and they all survived the war. And also, Allied flyers, pilots were coming through this village also. When their planes had crashed, sometimes and I've seen too many of them crash, the Germans would come with their jeeps and go up there to see if they could take a prisoner. But sometimes local people were there first and were able to save pilots, and they transited through there on their way back to England. Next. This was the place where my parents were hidden. It was already boarded up. And on the right down below, that up there where the red tiles are, that was the attic where my parents were hidden. There were no sliding glass doors or anything, but that's where they were hidden. The next. This is one of the tanks in the village that day. Next. And that was the chocolate I got. This, as you know, there are stolpersteinen, or stumbling blocks through many of the villages and towns and cities in Europe. These are tiles that are placed in front of homes where apartments where Jews lived to honor them, because the accurate records the Germans had, they know exactly all the information on the people who had lived in those houses. And these were 2 that I placed for my Dutch grandparents. My On the right is for my grandfather, Wolf Peper. It says murdered in Sobibor on the 21st of May 1943, and he was 60 years old. The other one is for my grandmother, and it said Amsterdam. She died on the 12th of May in 1943. Okay. This was one of the transit camps. The next. That transit camp, there were many, many children, and they have a memorial with all things related to children. And all these children were taken from there to the concentration camps. The next. That was another memorial there dedicated to many, many people. This was a picture of my husband and I, my late husband and I. We worked for an airline, Pan Am. But the next picture to me is the most beautiful picture of all. This is our family. And if I, because I'm here, if I wasn't here, none of this would exist. And I'm so very thankful for the people who hit us. And they have some of the daughter of the second family has met my children, but we have four children, nine grandchildren, and right now we also have two great grandchildren. And all because people cared. It didn't matter that we were Jewish and they were Christians. We were human beings. And they risked their lives too to save us. And I am very close to both families. Every year that I'm in the Netherlands, I get together with all of them. And I'm so thankful for them. So thankful because look at what we have here. That's it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Maud, for sharing your compelling story. I was riveted. I'm sure everyone was. We're
It's just
so
very hard to tell 3 years because there's so much, and the only people who really get to know the full scope are the teachers I take for 2 weeks. And they keep saying, tell us more, tell us more. So that sound, but
and I'm sure there's still more to tell.
yeah, oh yes.
Well, we're so thankful you shared what you did and you do it in such a beautiful way. And it's really interesting also to hear it from the child's perspective because we don't really hear that a lot. So I thank you so much. And we've had a lot of questions for you come up in the chat. So I'm going to introduce Lauren Kashash, who will be reading the questions for you to answer.
Okay.
Maud, we are so incredibly grateful for your courage in revisiting these memories for the benefit of everyone on the call tonight and who will later rewatch the recording from this. And we've heard you say in the past that education is our best defense against hate. And today we've seen why. And so to help us process and learn further from your experiences, we'll move into a brief Q&A session now. We have some documented questions already. For those who haven't had a chance to add your question, if you could please add it in the Q&A functionality in the Zoom on the bottom panel here. I'll be able to read those questions aloud for us tonight. Maud, jumping into the first question, what feelings have you had in revisiting, in going back to the Netherlands? And does it for you trigger past traumas, or is it more of an opportunity to find healing and closure?
I think the very first time I was back in the fishing village, I was with my husband and I was scared to death walking through there. This is after I had been in the United States because I expected a soldier to come around the corner. Um, but now that, I'm okay now. But and I think by me also speaking about it, that was very hard at first because I'm seeing things as you just I'm talking, I'm describing it, I'm seeing, I'm relaying it. So, and it just really it, it it's been hard, but it's also helped me a great deal for me to tell my story. It's healed me. After the war, when I was back with my parents in 1946, I had a nervous breakdown as a 10-year-old. So these things, I guess, just all were there. And going back really helps me, and I'm much more comfortable now each time I get back there.
On a related question, was there ever a moment when you hid that you wanted to tell someone that you were Jewish? The person that added this question said it must have been so difficult constantly being someone else.
Well, I was too little. I don't know. I was only 6 years old. I didn't have the mind of someone older. So I don't know. I never really said, and I don't remember at all. And I remember very little about before I went into hiding. It just all started when, you know, in hiding. But even then, I remember nothing before I left home. But then during the war, I don't know what I was thinking. I mean, I was little. I have no idea.
Another question here is around the names of the towns you were in before and after the war. Are you able to share those with us?
Oh, sure. The first town, you mean after the war or during the war?
The question is before and after the war.
We lived in a town called Amersfoort, and then when we went into hiding, we were in a village called Oldebroek. Then the fishing village was Elburg, and then we went back to Amersfoort, and then my father, because we had nothing after the war, and my father eventually got a job, and then he had a company, and his office was in Amsterdam. Then we lived in Amsterdam from 1948 to 1950 when we left for America. And my first foot on American soil was in New Jersey. It was in Hoboken because we came on the Holland America line. And then we lived in New York. And my father's first job was busboy at the Astor Hotel in New York. And we lived in a rooming house in Manhattan. And eventually we moved to Queens on, New York, and lived in Kew Garden Hills, Forest Hills. And I lived in so many places after because my late husband was an airline pilot. So we moved around a bit.
One
And,
of you just, oh, one of
and
the questions, yeah,
New
please.
Jersey, I've been in New Jersey. We were living in Massachusetts. Then we decided to come to New Jersey, and I've been in New Jersey now since the early 60s.
How old were you when you first arrived in the States in 1950?
14 and a half years old.
Okay. Did
14.
your
Yeah.
did your parents ever tell you what happened to them while they were in
Not
hiding?
not years later when I asked, because it was the same thing that we're not going to talk about it. They never knew much about things that I saw and things that I experienced as a child. They never, and some of those things I still can't even talk about. And no, it wasn't until I was much older when I started to ask them questions.
There's another question here. One says that you look younger every time they see you and that you're beautiful inside and out. And
That's
they also want to know if you have a picture of the dresser that you and your sister were hidden in.
the what? It wasn't a dresser. Dresser, did you say?
That's what the question asks.
No, yeah, because, well, on the farm, it was very primitive. We didn't have beds or bedroom. It was this room, and there were like, on the wall, there were like two doors. You could open it, and it was like, then you could see it was about this high inside. On top of that was a straw mattress, and that's where we slept. It was called a stay in Dutch, but those the old farmhouses. That's what they had, and there was one for my sister and I, and one for aunt and uncle.
I'm going to transition to asking you more current questions
Mm.
now. One of those questions is about how you met your husband and whether he was a survivor as well.
No, he was not a survivor. We met at Pan American World Airways. We were both 19. Everybody working there was a lot older. So, and we worked a 4 to 12:30 shift at the airport. And so that at Idlewild, well, it's now Kennedy Airport, but it was like one building. And they would always, 4 to 12:30, you go out afterwards, to have a drink or to do something. So they would always make sure that both of us were there. And that's how we fell in love.
That's really special.
Yeah.
As a survivor, another question asks, what are your feelings about today's generation of Germans as descendants of the Nazis And do you see hope for them? I think this is maybe it could be broadly applied though. Do you see
Mm.
hope in terms of the learning from the past and building bridges with future generations of survivors?
I see it, and because it's been over 80, going on 85 years or more, that they try to disassociate themselves from it. I was really concerned because the Netherlands, what they did recently was published all the names of those who they knew were working with the Nazis. But why do it now? These families have, there's so many generations since then also, and it's very different. I was asked by a friend of mine who lives in, friends of mine in Germany. They wanted me to come to their, while I was staying with them, they wanted me to speak to their community of my story. And that was hard. At first, I thought to stand there and tell a story, but I felt a lot better, and everybody was so understanding about it too, and of how horrible they thought of what happened so many years ago. And I think most Germans look at it that way. It's just, I think, other people who are more with anti-Semitism in other countries, not so much the Germans themselves, I think, from what I see.
And as you think about your experience in the US, has your own experience guided your opinions on standing up for others who are discriminated against in history?
Oh, sure. I mean, I realize that, and I see it too with students. The more I tell my story, I'm really trying to teach them to be kind and to respect. I don't talk about horrible things at all. My whole story it was negative, but I tell it in a positive way. And I know one of the schools I was at, that they write thank you notes, and the teachers, the first paragraph, they had to thank Mrs. Dahme. The second paragraph, they had to say what did they learn. The third paragraph, how are they going to use it? And this was either fifth or sixth grader. And on how he was going to use it, he wrote, I have a new baby brother. I don't like him very much, but I'm going to be very nice to him now, talk to him and play with him. And that just hit me because on even how young he was, he understood what I was trying to tell him. So I think there's such hope the more we tell our stories, the survivors of, and the 2G and the 3G is so important because you're talking of what you have heard from your family and the survivors of what they experienced. I think is so important because to really explain it to people, but there's some stupid people who will never learn. They'll always have this attitude. But I think the more we speak and the more, hopefully, it will help a great deal. But I personally have had some, things thrown at me by someone in my community when I first started speaking. And I was running for public office, and he sent anonymously my bio back with things like, what was your maiden name? Levy, Cohen. Why would, all these different things, which weren't true. And it was just very, very sad. And he wrote the Hartog County Democrat, the paper that was here, also letters. And I just asked everyone not to respond because it just added fuel to the fire. But he was the only one who really um, got under my skin. So but I think just sharing stories and I tell kids too. I said, you're walking somewhere and you see a stranger, and maybe sometimes you just stop and say hello. I and people and with a smile, and people stop and I talk to everybody. And because and the reaction from people is always so amazing, and I think we try to instill that into our kids at a young age. Hopefully, they will They will be kind and not, it's just, it's so hard for me right now with the wars going on and everything. It's just so difficult. I feel sometimes we're back in the 1930s here in this country. Scary.
Maud, you truly are such an inspiration in sharing your story and your reflections here. I want to ask you one more question to close out this evening. And because you have shared so much hope with us, I'm hoping that you can also impart some lessons here that we can carry forward. For the children and grandchildren of survivors that are watching tonight, what is one piece of advice that you have for us as we take on the mantle of keeping these stories alive?
Well, I think it's so important, and I'm so pleased that you all are doing this. And I think you just have to continue, um, because it's so important, because it's the same as me. You all are also speaking on the same, and it's just so important for people to understand, because there's so much out there and fake things and people believe things. And I think the more you're out and the more you're telling the stories of your families is so very important. And I just sometimes I feel very helpless. Like, what what do you do? But I find, and I see it through the letters, and I'm sure you all receive letters also from students, thank you letters, and where you see that you've reached them. And it's so important. When I did during COVID, I did nothing but Zooms. And it was great. So I said to the teachers, would you also ask the parents, because they were home too, for the parents to listen to my story? And I think that's so important. I'd really like to have more parents and child involved. But many parents are working and they can't come to schools or to listen. So I think it's important. And also for all of you to also talk, to adults. I think is also so important to organizations. This week I'm speaking at a Rotary, but things like that. It's also so important because to really share your stories and really make people think and realize. It's just, I don't know. I hope I answered it.
You did, and you gave us a lot to think about over the course of tonight, a lot to carry forward with us. We're very grateful for it. I'm going to turn it over to Amy now to close out the conversation. Thank you, Maud.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. Oh, wow, Maud, that was just incredible. And just hearing your perspectives and your answers to the questions, it's just really gives us all something to think about. And I think a lot of us share your concern with the rising anti-Semitism and how you're feeling. And I know it hits you in a different way since you've already experienced such tragic anti-Semitism in your lifetime. Um, which is why, and we're so thankful for you sharing all of that. That's why we continue to speak, and the grandchildren are speaking in schools. And as I said, we've been
Mhm.
really around a lot of schools in New Jersey. Um, we provide the programming completely for free. It costs approximately $360 per presentation to actually coordinate all the logistics. So we rely on fundraising for that. So for our audience, we hope that you would consider helping us to reach more classrooms by making a donation at the link that's in the chat. If you've already donated to us, thank you so much. The school year is winding down, but we're trying to plan also for next year. And as we do that, anybody who has connections with schools that might want us to come and speak, we'd welcome that connection. We're always looking for new schools to speak with and educators who want our speakers in their class. So please do reach out and let us know. We have a lot of people who are ready to speak and more that are being trained all the time.
Oh, that's
Um,
wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah.
and interestingly, and I know Maud, we discussed this right before we came on the Zoom, but there's actually now 4Gs who are starting to gather, and there's a group, a 4G group who is forming in New Jersey. They actually just I think, created their Instagram page. So I believe the link, yes, the link is in the chat.
Mhm.
So I encourage everyone on this call to, you know, log in and follow that Instagram, and please share with all the 4Gs in your life. I mean, many, we may not be, I think we might have a couple of 4Gs on the call. Um, Shout out to one of them that may be my son. And but I'm sure that all of us have 4Gs in their life that might be interested in that community. So we also are organizing some events for 3G locally in Monmouth County and Bergen County. There are some events coming up, and really it's just a way to form community and to help raise awareness for our organization and hopefully raise a little bit of money. So tomorrow we'll be sending out an email with links to that information with all the details. So again, I can't thank you enough, Maud, for sharing your story with all of us tonight. I was riveted, and I know everyone here was, um, and it's just amazing the way you tell it is so incredible. So thank you from all of us here, 3GNJ and our whole audience. We appreciate you so much, and I hope to see you in person again very, very soon.
Yeah, I'm around. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Okay. Thank
Very
you.
much.
And have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bye bye. I'm going to sign.